So I rely on several texts I mentioned immediately. Priya Jerry's is the one he wrote with Valier. Is the correct pronunciation? Valier. And then another article Jerry published in 2009 on the issue of religious beliefs in public justification. Then obviously Order of Public Reason. Then Jonathan Kwong's reaction in his book Liberalism Without Perfection, and then an exciting debate on a blog, Public Reason, and this is really amazing. The most interesting participants to me were Andrew Lister and Mika Schwartzman and Jonathan Kwong, and this is really exciting when you see somebody writing before going to sleep at 1:21 and the other replying in 6:28 in the morning. The structure of the paper is I reconstruct the debate and then I have some of my comments. The starting point of the paper is represented by the public justification principle. So, as John Stuart Mill would say, one simple principle. Hell is a justified coercive law only if each and every member of the public P has conclusive reasons R to accept L as a requirement. Now just a few specifications for those who didn't read the book. What's the public? So the public does not include all citizens. It includes those persons and moral perspectives that we recognize as sufficiently plausible as moral perspectives that we care about whether they can accept a rule. So Gauss is not suggesting that we banish or otherwise deny the rights of citizenship to people simply because they are unreasonable, but they are not part of the public. The public justification commitment of public decision-making has been the source of dispute between people who want to exclude religious beliefs, but also other beliefs that they find as permanently controversial, from the process of public justification and the opponents of these people who want to exclude. The exclusion on which the paper is focused regards religious beliefs in the public debate and in the process of voting upon political issues. So, why does the ideal of public justification appear to these people to be inimical to religious beliefs as grounds of justification of laws? Imagine Alf, who wants to impose a law on a community where there is also Betty. If he respects Betty as free and equal, he will not want to impose the law on her if he is not able to show her that she has a conclusive reason to accept the law. Note that it is not sufficient that this is a conclusive reason only for him. So, if his commitment is religious and the reason to which he appeals is religious, while Betty is not religious, he cannot use a religious reason to justify the law. From this, many of the people involved in the debate on public justification say that subjects who participate in the procedure of public justification must share the conclusive reason. A passage here happens from the idea that one cannot impose a law on another on the basis of a reason that the other does not accept, to the idea that they must share the same reasons. As a consequence, principles of restraint are, with different strength, endorsed by many. That is, principles that say that people must restrain to advance reasons for a law that are not shared by all members of the public. Gauss rejects this idea. There are three main errors identified in the exclusionary proposal. Here I rely to the paper written with Valier. The first and the only one that on which I will focus on the paper is the error of consensus. This is the mistake committed by all those who think that every justified law must be based on a reason that all citizens accept. We can see the reply to the error of consensus with Gauss and Pallia's words. What a plausible notion of accessibility requires is not that alpha and beta share justificatory reasons, but that their reasons are mutually intelligible to each other as reasons. So not sharing, but mutually intelligibility. We have an intelligible reason when we understand the deliberative root from a standard. That is something that, if held, gives us a reason to endorse a rule, to the endorsement of a rule. So one simple example could be, if we are virtuous, for example, human flourishing can be the ground on which base the right to life and our requirement of laws protecting the right to life. Why is shareability rejected? It appears as inconsistent with reasonable pluralism. So we mentioned today several times what's reasonable pluralism. I will spend just a few words for those who are not so much, do not have so much knowledge of this debate. According to the idea of reasonable pluralism, people come to different conclusions on good and values, even if they rely on the same evidence and consider the same arguments. This is because their reasoning is influenced by a variety of values, interests, and so on, and they are at different levels of sophistication. If we accept shareability as a constraint, then we must assume a situation where everyone is convinced by the same arguments. But can we assume this if we are committed to the idea of reasonable pluralism? Gauss' answer is negative, and this is the reason why he recommends to renounce to the shareability requirement the principles of restraint and the consensus conception of public justification. Instead, he proposes the convergence conception. The convergence conception accepts a situation where each of different members has her own reason, different from those of others, that makes reasonable for her to accept the law, but they converge on the same law. So they have these different reasons, but each reason is a support for the same law. Only the consensus conception excludes religious beliefs. This is not the case for the convergence conception. So imagine a possible Martin Luther King, I'm not really speaking about the historical figure, a person who fights against racial segregation but appeals only on religious beliefs. This would not be admitted by the consensus conception, but can be accepted by the convergence conception. So the reason why I'm saying I'm not speaking about the historical Martin Luther King is because I don't want to enter in exegesis of his thought, whether he really was relying on religious beliefs. Now I come to some comments. The idea of renouncing to the consensus about reasons is criticized by Jonathan Kwong. Kwong objects to the substitution of consensus with convergence by relying on the principle of sincerity. So what does say this principle? Sincerity requires that we not support or advocate laws when we do not sincerely believe they can be justified to others, regardless of what those others may themselves believe. The way of public justification endorsed by Kwong, that is exclusionary of religious reasons, requires that not only each person has her own specific reason for justifying a law, but that they all endorse the same sufficient reason. So the consensus conception we see earlier. So in this view, we have not a proper public justification when a person A has a reason RA for a law, and RA is not an acceptable reason for another person B on whom the law will be applied, even if she has a reason RB for justifying the law. The most important reason for supporting the sincerity requirement, according to Kwong, is that it distinguishes public justification from manipulation. So people who appeal in this debate to the sincerity requirement in order to reject the share view rely on, say that if we accept the convergence view and not the consensus view, we are in the same position as a father who says to the child, well, go to sleep. And the child says, yes, Daddy, you are right, I go to sleep because otherwise Santa Claus will not give a present to me. But obviously, if the father says, yes, you are right, you will not get a present, go to bed, the father is manipulating. So this would be a most extreme example for it. The first reply that it is possible to offer to Kwong is that it is not clear that the convergence view of justification infringes the sincerity requirement. There would be clear insincerity only if A tells B that he accepts her general view in which there is a reason RB that justifies L. So there is no, for example, like the father who says, yes, you are right, Santa Claus will not give you the present. So there is no clear insincerity, provided that A does not pretend that he endorses B's system of beliefs, that he really thinks that L is justified in her system of beliefs, and that he clearly states that he thinks to be, what he thinks to be the proper reason for L. This reply to the sincerity objection is related to the remarks on justification offered by Gauss. As he says, warrant and justification are always path-dependent. For this reason, it will often happen that A will have in his belief system a defeater for RB, absent in B's system. As a consequence, he may conclude that the reason is unjustified in his belief system and not in B's belief system. He may, therefore, conclude that he is not justified in endorsing RB, while B is justified in doing so. And he is not insincere in being satisfied by the fact that B endorses RB as a justificatory reason. RB, quote, is defeated in his system, but his system does not determine what is justified for her to believe. If A does not accept the legitimacy of B's endorsing RB in the context of her system of beliefs, he would apply a veto to, quote, the reasonable considerations of others, manifesting disrespect for them as fellow moral agents. In veto this goes in order to say that B is justified in endorsing RB as a reason for L, does not need to adhere to her general view, but only to find it intelligible, as we have seen earlier. Now I go to the blog discussion on the public reason site, and in pronouncements in this blog discussion, Kwong confirms his disagreement with the denial of the thesis that there is something insincere in the convergence view. More precisely, Kwong agrees that there is nothing uncontroversial in saying, I don't adhere to your doctrine myself, but I believe that your doctrine clearly supports a commitment to Rule X, so nothing bad with this. But the controversial point is the claim, I believe your doctrine clearly supports a commitment to Rule X, and I believe you are justified in believing the relevant part of your doctrine. And Kwong says that if A is not able to endorse this claim, A cannot sincerely believe that B's endorsement of X satisfies the principle of justificatory sincerity. That is, A cannot sincerely believe that X is justified to B. This is clearly opposed to what we have seen that Gauss says about justification. That is, that it is path-dependent, and what is a defeater in A's system of beliefs is not a defeater in B's system of beliefs. To this view of justification, Kwong offers a series of replies. First, he says that Gauss appeals to a controversial epistemology, one that, for example, would not be accepted by externalists or our friend Timothy Williamson, for example, will feel insulted by this, as we know. And as such, cannot be part of public justification that excludes controversial philosophical views. Second, Kwong says that if we put aside his strong requirement, we, quote, would be able to be sincerely engaged in convergent forms of justification with people who hold obvious silly doctrines, for example, astrology, by saying, well, I don't believe you are justified in accepting astrology, but you do accept it, so let me explain why Rule X can be imposed on you in light of your beliefs. Third, if it's okay to impose a rule on people provided one believes that those on whom the rule will be imposed have reasons that are intelligible and support the rule, then this no longer seems to be an account of public justification, but an account of public intelligibility. Schematically, this is Kwong's argument. First, convergent justifications amongst people adhering to different comprehensive doctrines can only be made consistent with the principle of justificatory sincerity, provided each person involved sincerely believes that the other people involved are justified in adhering to their different comprehensive doctrines. Second, the belief required in one is generally not possible unless citizens accept certain epistemological or axiological doctrines, for example, Gauss. Third, the fact of reasonable pluralism means we cannot and should not expect citizens in a liberal society to adhere to any particular epistemological or axiological theory. Fourth, therefore, as a general rule, we cannot expect convergent forms of justification to be consistent with the principle of justificatory sincerity in a liberal society. Kwong thinks that Gauss avoids the conclusion of this argument by renouncing to the condition in one, that is, to the justification requirement, and by substituting it with the intelligibility requirement. This, says Kwong, avoids the conclusion of the argument, but the price is high. Rules are not anymore justified to each person. A does not think that B is justified in holding the rule X, and so, according to the public justification requirement, it would be wrong of him to support it. I think that Kwong is wrong in relation to two, and consequently in everything that follows. In relation to the thesis that Gauss' proposal epistemologically controversial, I don't exclude that it is, or it may be, controversial in a strictly epistemological debate, so speaking with an externalist like Timothy Williamson. But I think that it is the only appropriate view in the context of discussion of public justification. In this context, we must give the due relevance to the ideas of free and equal moral persons, burdens of judgment, reasonable pluralism, society as a fair scheme of cooperation. In particular, I cannot see how we can disassociate the path-dependent view of justification from the ideas of reasonable pluralism and of burdens of judgment. I see as the only coherent view with reasonable pluralism to endorse a weaker criterion than the one endorsed by Kwong. Precisely, we must endorse the intelligibility criterion of Gauss and take justified as meaning justified in the context of one of such doctrines. If we do this, do we face the danger of Kwong's astrology example? That is, that we must accept somebody justified in accepting a reason R for a law L by relying on astrology. Probably, I would say most probably, almost certainly not, because it is difficult to imagine that astrology passes the intelligibility test. But sometimes maybe it may be possible if the astrologist shows intelligibility. But I think that if there is such possible danger, I think that Kwong faces the opposite danger, that of excluding from public justification plausible moral theories which with a sad high reputation, like that of virtue theory, for example, that Jerry mentioned in his book, and he said there may be colleagues of mine who accept virtue theories and derive justification from the virtue theory, which essentially is a plausible moral doctrine. And I think that this is a greater danger than avoiding to risk to impede astrology if it may appear intelligible to participate in the convergence. With this, obviously, I do not say that I find astrology as a reputable source of justification of moral beliefs. Speaking frankly, I have the same opinion about astrology as I have in relation to many endorsements of religions. But I think that it may be coherent with reasonable pluralism to let them enter in the space of justification in the case of convergence, and that people who endorse astrological or religious beliefs may be generally reasonable if and accept the ideas of free and equal moral persons, burdens of judgment, reasonable pluralism, and society as a fair scheme of cooperation. A relevant problem for Kwong's appeal to stronger criteria than intelligibility for justificatory reasons is that he renounces in this way to one of the basic resources that we have in moral reasoning with others. Frequently, we cannot do better than showing others that there is an incoherence in their system of beliefs. This corresponds exactly to showing them that they must accept a reason from their point of view. And even in some introductory books to ethics, like for example McNaughton's Moral Vision, people used to write that especially if we endorse a non-cognitivist view on ethics, this is the only possibility that we have. And if this is true, it seems that maybe Kwong is really appealing to a controversial moral epistemology, because he excludes the resources of the debate available, the only maybe the resources of debate available to non-cognitivists or some non-cognitivists. If we look at practical situations, there appear relevant counterexamples to Kwong's objection to justification as convergence. Think about a person engaged against racial segregation like the pseudo Martin Luther King I mentioned earlier. And think about the possibility that his only reasons against racial segregation are religious. And think that he tries to convince people by writing a pseudo letter from Birmingham jail. So he tries to convince people who share the same religious beliefs that racial segregation is morally wrong. He tries to convince them about a coercive law, that is a law that forbids to local authorities to vote for segregated schools. His co-believers accept his arguments. Are we insincere if we accept that the law is justified if we do not share the religious beliefs? Again, I do not see any reason for saying this, provided we do not pretend that we share the religious beliefs. But more importantly, we renounce to the public justification of an important law, which seems to me as a serious problem for a theory of public justification. Somebody could not be convinced of this as a counterexample because they might say, well, but this is such an incredibly strong injustice that maybe here we must not insist on the sincerity principle. But then I can find other examples, like the referendum for Croatia joining European Union. There may be people not convinced, who do not find any sufficient public reason for voting for the referendum, but they can be convinced by religious arguments, for example, saying putting communities together because we are all a word community as human beings and so on and so on. So here, although we do not have a deep injustice, there is not a deep injustice if Croatia doesn't join European Union, but nevertheless this would be a very bad policy, and I think it would be a bad fact to renounce such a possibility of convergence. What is important, we can even think that religion deserves an intellectual high reputation, and that although we think that it does not correspond to truth, it has a valuable argumentation on its side. In this case, we sincerely think that the religious people have considerable epistemological support for their beliefs. This, for example, is something, if I interpret correctly, find is Valier's, the article that Valier wrote when against the exclusion of religious reasons, and he says, well, we have here, for example, natural religion that relies on ordinary appeal to rationality and reason. It is important to see at this point that the convergence view has all the advantages that the consensus view has in relation to impeding the imposition of coercing law on pure religious grounds. If such laws are not supported by reasons that other people endorse, we do not embrace religious worldviews that they fail to be publicly justified. People who, like me, want to avoid the enforcement of religions can be satisfied with the protection offered by the convergence view. I think it was more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, then I can stop at this point. Oh, I stopped at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elvio. Questions, comments? So, David, first.
I just want to check that I've got it clear. So, Ron's argument against coherence is roughly because he thinks that, with respect to any given law that one is trying to persuade someone to accept, that if one holds that that person is justified in holding his belief, you must also be committed to the claim of thinking that the belief is justified. Okay? So he's just conflating those two things together. In which case, even if you thought it might matter that since I'm trying to persuade you and I don't share that belief, I can think you're justified in holding the belief without thinking the belief is justified. Simply, either straight or on the basis that I provide you reasons why I don't think that your belief is justified. So in terms of sincerity, the most one can possibly get is that I have an obligation in persuading you to accept law on the basis of your justified beliefs, to simultaneously give you my reasons for not thinking your belief is justified, which if you reject them, that's that. So the sincerity requirement can't get him to the consensus view. I mean, there isn't enough there. You know, the only way you can get to that is if he just completely conflates the issue of whether you're justified in holding it. Whether I think you're justified in holding your belief with the question of whether your belief is justified. So I take it, this is a request for clarification. That's essentially what you're saying here. Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
Anna?
I always start from Rawls, and I don't see what was wrong with Rawls' initial idea that we had to go into all of this, because Rawls' initial, as I saw it, idea was that you need two perspectives from which you justify something. Okay, so it's the public perspective or the perspective of somebody who's proposing a law or a policy, and it has to, that law or policy has to be justified in terms of public doctrine or something that he proposes. And how a citizen who is supposed to be subject to that law will put that law into his or her own doctrine as a model or this or that is his or her own business. And I don't see why we should, we only have complications if we try to put a person who is a public official, let's say, like a politician, should tell somebody who is a citizen what is his or her proper reason for accepting the law. I think it is one move too much, and it only complicates things. You justify it in terms of public doctrine and let the citizens see if that fits into their own views. I agree that there is insincerity if you try to tell somebody that he or she should accept your law because it is in accordance with his or her own belief that you don't believe in. And I know this because I have a daughter and who goes to church and believes in God, and I don't. And when I'm trying to tell her, try to bring some religious argument on her and saying, well, you believe in God, you should do that because God wants you to. And she says, why do you care? You don't believe in God. So she doesn't want to listen to me. So I think it's something similar would happen in a public situation. If there's a politician who tells you, oh, you have to accept this law, or you have to reject this law because you're this and that, and I'm not this and that.
Yeah. So, well, the debate is not totally a step too much, because in fact, let's say the motivation Kwong says is a valuable motivation. It's a motivation of strengthening what we can call civic friendship. That is, that really we want to make clear to each other what are the reasons, and we don't manipulate with each other. So think of politicians who, for example, have a plan of attacking a country because of economic interest of our country, but then there is Ike going around and saying there is conspiracy in that country, they are making a nuclear weapon. So this is contrary of what happens. Ike is saying, no, they are not making the weapon. But imagine the reverse situation. So people come to believe, well, there is a weapon there. And then the politician, oh, okay, it's nice that people believe this, and we will not have problem. Obviously, this is not a case of public justification. We can make better examples. But basically, even if we make better examples, that more appear as a situation of public justification. Nevertheless, certainly we want to exclude such kind of insincerities. This is okay. But then what it seems to me is that Kwong is overreacting, because what Kwong is doing is not only excluding the convergence view of Jerry, but he also excludes or strongly reduces the possibility of something that Rawls admits. And it's the reasoning from conjecture. And because let's go to see the limits that Kwong puts to reasoning from conjecture. So for people who don't know what's the reason from conjecture, Rawls says, well, sometimes we can do something that broadly resembles the movement of Alf and Betty. That is, I argue from Betty's, what's inside Betty's comprehensive doctrine, doctrines say her, look, this follows, it's the only possible thing coherent with your doctrine supporting this law. And however, even this would not be good for Kwong, at least with very sincere qualifications, and this is his quotation. Reasoning from conjecture can be consistent with the principle of justificatory sincerity. Only if Betty believes there are sufficient shared reasons for rule X. So Betty must believe that in fact Betty and Alf share some reasons. But she also believes Alf's unjustifiable comprehensive doctrine support X. Then I think she can engage in sincere reasoning from conjecture with Alf, where she tries to show him his own doctrine commits him to X. But she probably ought to publicly articulate the shared reasons too if we believe in a strong publicity condition. So see this qualification, I mean the qualification is really very, very strong. In fact, I can reason from conjecture only if I think that there is also a shared reason, and in fact I think it's really depriving ourselves of something that we have as a resource in most possible situations. So from this example on the reasoning from conjecture, I think that we see that really Kwong is overreacting and that his principle of sincerity is much stronger than even Rawls.
Okay, thank you. Alice?
I don't know if this is a problem for you at all, but it seems a bit of a problem for me. It seems, and you don't seem to give religious people and, let's say, let's call them secular liberals, equal play. Playing field. So I remember what you said, okay, if we're discussing, religious equality, so we want to get, for all laws, striking down, and we want to have laws that ensure racial equality. If Martin Luther King or pseudo-Martin Luther King has religious reasons, then I have my anti-argument to break. However, if pseudo-Martin Luther King now wants to, after we achieve this goal together, wants to ban use of contraceptions because he has religious reasons of why do you refuse it? This is what you suggested. I don't know if it's suggested. Well, I refuse it because we don't accept your religious understanding of human sexuality. Also, we have a priority that all people in because they should be safe from AIDS and other exposures. So that will not work for them. So in the first case, it works. In the second case, it doesn't work. So that is the same criteria applies to liberals. Okay, so we want to stop liberation. Inequality, anti-argument for that, we work equally as Martin Luther for this argument. But let's say a liberal wants to push something, let's say legalization of marijuana, and he gives you the whole autonomy argument and so on and so forth. And the religious person says, no, I don't see that. That's not autonomy. I don't see that as somebody to indulge in something that's highly addictive and damaging for you, and so that's not acceptable. So does that, then the liberal has to back down and say, that I don't want to push that through. Are they playing the same game, or is the liberal have right to push in the arguments that the religious person will not accept?
Well, first we must take the assumption of the debate is that we are justifying law between free and equal people. So if somebody rejects this assumption, then we have a very different debate. So it's a discussion inside the family of people who accept the presumption of justification is between free and equal people. If we accept this assumption, and I propose to do this debate, because otherwise we have a very different debate, then I think it's okay to accept the presumption of the liberty principle that I did mention today. As Jerry and Maria, I remember, has written in that paper, we must not rush in coercing. That is, it must be difficult to coerce So in the sense that if we have not a good justification for coercing, then like in the marijuana case, we have good reasons. We have not a strong justification for coercing, then we have a good reason not to coerce.
Hang on, law is a question about what the law is going to be, yeah? And so in this case, the Liberals are in exactly the same position as the religious person on contraception. The religious people have reasonable grounds for rejecting the law saying you can't smoke marijuana. That's fine, they can essentially knock it down. And you can't build that already into the picture and say it's fine. And we're going to exempt someone not. School law is coercive. So, you know, that's what we've dedicated around, isn't it? About whether or not to have coercive laws.
Well, in some sense, we can say all law is coercive, and this is a Hobbes reaction. Then obviously we must look at what means coercing, and we enter in a debate that is not totally easy. So for example, like when I was saying that even law forbidding racial segregation in the sense of forbidding local authorities to vote, in some sense, to vote for racial segregation is coercive. However, I would here appeal again to the assumption of having free and equal people, because in the case of the racial segregation, I would say, but here the racial segregation is something that goes directly against the principle that people are equal, and in this sense, the justification of such a law must be particularly strong. So the same I would say about laws where somebody wants to restrict other people's behavior. And here I'm aware that we enter, for example, in the issue of John Stuart Mill when he tries to defend the harm to other principle, and where he excludes, however, from harms to others, harms created by the fact that we harm them because we infringe something in what they believe. But I think that his reply is good, and so when I speak about coercion, I primarily refer to something that coerces somebody because of the fact that somebody wants to impose on the others.
Okay, but sorry, the way it's set up.
Just say, okay, you say for this, let's give another example. That the voice is. Liberals say children have to learn certain things in school. You can't homeschool children and teach them creationist theory. You have to learn evolutionary theory. You can teach your child at home, but he has to learn these things. And the religious guy says, I don't know, that's not true. I'm not going to teach my child something that's not true. So here the liberal wants to coerce and force people, either experience to teach them something so we're out of it. So in this case, if the religious person says, absolutely not, I don't want my child to listen to that crap. Is the liberal have to, by this principle, does he have to back down and say, okay, it's not acceptable for you, then we won't do it. Because if he doesn't, then you're not treating religious people and secular religious as equal,
Well, not all liberals, however. So there are liberals like Chandran Kukatkas who totally refuse.
No, you. I'm interested in you. This is your suggestion. What did you say?
No.
You say liberals, then have to back down. That's
okay.
all.
So second, there is, for example, John Stuart Mill, who justifies the right of the states to enforce education for children, but he's very cautious in this. He says some basic knowledge like writing, reading, basic things, but not words, for example. Now, so first I wanted to distinguish by saying not all liberals. Second, what I would say, and this is the reason why I embrace Brian Barry's position, that the children's situation is specific in the sense that in children's situations there is a conflict of values and conflict of principles. On one side, we can look from the standpoint of saying, well, it's the freedom of the parents to educate their child or their children in the way they want. However, in another sense, and here is where Barry and Neil agree, although they don't agree on how much the state can interfere, the issue is not the issue of their freedom. The issue is the issue of their power. So why the parents have to have such an absolute power? Then why would a liberal have the right to limit the, let's say, the power of parents on the children? I think that here we can again appeal to the idea of free and equal people, that the state can interfere as much as the state, as the parents limits the education, the parents limit the education of their children, such as not permitting them to develop as free and equal members of society.
Their education. If you're religious, you think they're, you get it? You're already creating state. You want to say what is legitimate for state to do. You're already saying that the state is liberal and it's doing what it thinks is right. It has to justify. You already sort of made the state liberal, and now you're saying what it can do. I mean, I follow your argument with kids, but you have to look at the other side. The other side says, you know, we're not damaging our child. You want to damage my child. You want to teach him this crap about Darwin and stuff. So what you're assuming is, I mean, you can take Brian Barry's argument, say, well, talking crap. I mean, first we're going to teach them Darwin since their parents are idiots. So what we're going to teach them is what's true, but that's what you want to avoid. So I'm open.
Yeah, but don't forget that the religions which Barry is discussing are religions that do not endorse the view of people as free and equal. Well, Amish are extremely, how to say, limiting of the ways of life of members of community, and it would be quite easy to be even expelled.
Maybe from a liberal perspective. Again, you always put your liberal glasses on and then you judge.
Richard, I mean, you're essentially just adopting a comprehensive conception of the good and saying those reasons are fine here, which is kind of losing the whole notion that you have to engage in exchanges of public.
No, but okay, as I said, we can have two discussions. One possible discussion is how to defend liberalism against non-liberal views. What I try to do today is to see how justification goes on inside the limit of public reasoning. So the whole presumption of public reasoning is let's make a system of public justification under the presumption of free and equal people. So instead, it's not that I'm enforcing here a comprehensive view.
Here. Religious believer, okay?
Yeah.
And your job is to try and show me internal to my own commitments that I could endorse a law requiring all children to learn Darwin, or alternatively all children to be banned. Okay. Now let's say you can't do that. Let's say that there are no resources within my reasonable view, or any very limited ones for you doing that. Then your proposal hasn't met the public justification test.
Okay, there can be situations where in fact I can't demonstrate if I'm the state, let's say, or the liberal majority of the state, that something is really good for the children. In that case, here I would be on the million side, saying if there is not such a way, then obviously the state can't enforce. So the state has not the right to enforce.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, never sure.
Yeah. But if there is a way of showing that, so for example, a case where I can refer is the case of one of Brian Barry's examples. When he says a family asked the right from the state that their children are excluded from part of the literature, history of literature program of the school. Which part? There was a novel when there was a description of a situation in a family when the brother was preparing sandwiches while the sister was reading a book. And the family says, the parents say, this is not good because this is a perverse description of natural family relations. Well, in cases like this, for example, I think we can appeal to the idea of people as free and equal, at least in the sense that the children must see that there is this alternative possibility of living so that they can learn by themselves. They were speaking about a high school, so we can say children are not at the age when they have the right to vote, but at least at the age where they have the possibility of making some worldview choices.
Okay, we have one more question.
I wanted to jump back to Anna's question. I mean, why? We have these three elements in Rolf's perspective. We have comprehensive doctrines, set of shared reasons, and laws. And the thing is, now we lost shared reasons, we have comprehensive doctrines, we have laws or rules. We just say we are looking for convergence on laws. But the thing is that the thing we had, the set of shared reasons, was actually why do we need public reason for? Or why do we need public justification in the sense of causing public reason? Somehow the thing is that we need justification of laws first to be feasible, which if we stick only to convergence, we will somehow lose the feasibility of justification. People have to explain to everybody why do they accept the law. Then we will lose what we call stability for the right reasons. That is actually one of the desideratas of our justification. We will have contingent stability. The thing is, if we lose interpersonal.
But stability for the right reasons, though, we're not making sense.
But overall, because this is on shared reasons and not on the particular law. That's what I was trying to say. That maybe you don't have to explain to the adherents of comprehensive doctrines to stick to the law. They just have to be motivated to stick to the shared reasons, to the set of shared reasons, and that is enough. And then they can, from this set of shared reasons, which is wide enough, they can justify or call for laws or saying that laws are not okay. I mean that the justification that leaves out the set of shared reasons somehow seems really unfeasible, isn't it? Well, it's questions.
It's in the air.
Some of the things that folks will skip.
It doesn't figure it out. It doesn't insist upon it being the only way to do it. I mean, because a lot of people convergence versus consensus. The convergences there can't be. I take it the convergence view is we have consensus and reasons, that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily, if we don't, that doesn't stop the project. Which is another way to succeed as well. So, I mean, in one sense, the convergence view accepts the consensus views as subpart. So the argument is the only thing about shared reasons, or can these be justified by shared reasons or be different reasons?
Why can't we say that, let's say the only way through the shared reasons is, I think only saying it is wrong, okay? Because you don't have to be motivated by public reasons for a law. You can be motivated by your own contingent, by your own comprehensive reasons. Okay, that's what motivates you. That's why you want some law. But you're also motivated to explain that law by shared reasons.
Yeah, but
another
And you say, actually, actually shared reasons alone are not the only thing that motivates me for a law. Of course, I have my own comprehensive reasons, but when I justify a law, or when I try to persuade in the law, I will use shared reasons because somehow I also endorse the legal principle of legitimacy, as often say, or something like that. So I don't think somehow that there is convergence and consensus, and weak consensus. Convergence to shared reasons, or convergence from different comprehensive doctrines, and there is weak consensus of set of shared reasons, and then we discuss what law will apply.
But I mean, there's another issue, which is how far you can get with shared reasons. I mean, let's say you can get a reasonable range of laws and policies of shared reasons, but there may, of course, be other things, laws that we can get for convergent reasons that allow us to do more, in various ways in our society, which wouldn't satisfy shared reasons. Yes, in the sense of we all have exactly the same reason. So that's one point. The second point is when people often try to raise in relation to shared reasons the stability issue, all the right reasons that we all share. But take this analogy. I mean, one way in which you can have a stable society, a stable democratic society that reproduces itself over time, is if you have something like Habermasian constitutional patriotism. So everybody endorses the Constitution, they all endorse it for the same reasons. Okay? Another way, which my colleague Andy Mason proposed, is the notion of belonging to a polity, where we all identify with the central political institutions of the state, but we do so for very different reasons. Now, from the standpoint of the stable reproduction over time, I don't see why the second version, we all endorse and identify the central institutions of the state, but for different reasons, is a problem. Why is that less stable? Or why is it not stable?
In any case, well, never shot, if I can take also, we must focus on cases when we share the assumptions of public reason, so free and equal. We share several public reasons, but the main situations are situations where people think there are no, so public reason cannot say anything definitely on this situation. So for some people, the public reasons are not sufficient. So they share a lot amount of things, and I think this is sufficient to ensure stability. But let's go back to the example I was trying to give, the Croatian joining the European Union. So in this case, for example, as probably, or if not probably, it's not impossible that is the situation in Croatia. People may appeal to different things that may be different public reasons. So one public reason is, let's say, the economic interest of Croatia, or even other reasons supporting joining this wider European environment. There may be different public reasons also speaking for not joining European Union. Some of them, for example, might be, and I'm not certain we can exclude this as a public reason, the appeal to the right of self-ruling for a nation, let's say. So there is no definitely a debate. But then imagine that we try to show, as it may be possible, to the people who say, well, not European Union because it's more important, or it's very important to not lose our right of self-ruling our nation. Then we can say, well, but think you are not only Croats, you are Catholics as well. As Catholics, you must prefer to be part of the human community as much as you can. So if you can be part of this society that has some Christian origins, from your standpoint, it would be good to become a part of this community. And they say, well, yes, you are right. Where is the source of instability here? I don't see any source of instability. I don't see any source of insincerity. And I don't see losing civic friendship.